Queen Victoria entered history as the grandmother of Europe, yet we can say, without any doubt, that she also became Europe's great-grandmother, and even its great-great-grandmother. For example, both Queen Elizabeth II and her husband, Prince Philip, were Victoria's great-great-grandchildren. Queen Elizabeth II descended from the line of Victoria's firstborn son, King Edward VII, while Prince Philip came from the branch of Victoria's second daughter, Princess Alice. Let's make this clearer through a narrative image. Here we have Queen Victoria, then her son and heir, Edward VII. After him, her grandson, George V, and then her great-grandson, King George VI. Now, the other branch, Princess Alice, Victoria's daughter. Her daughter, Victoria, Marchioness of Milford Haven. Then Alice, Princess of Greece. And finally, her grandson, Philip, the prince who would one day marry Elizabeth II. The marriage of Elizabeth II and Philip shared the same great-great-grandmother. They were, therefore, distant cousins. Yet, as generations passed, their paths grew apart due to social differences. Elizabeth descended from reigning monarchs, while Philip came from women who held titles as princesses, but married dukes or princes without remaining in positions of power. When Elizabeth met Philip, and when she fell in love with him, he was a prince in exile, without money, without a home, and almost without a country. Would you like to discover the story of any of these kings, princes, or princesses? Just leave your request in the comments. But today, the protagonist of this story will be the mother of Prince Philip and mother-in-law of Queen Elizabeth II, a truly extraordinary figure. Prepare yourself to discover the exceptional life of Princess Alice of Battenberg. On February 25, 1885, an event of great significance took place at Windsor Castle. Her Serene Highness, Princess Alice of Battenberg, was born. She was the daughter of Prince Louis of Battenberg and his wife, Princess Victoria of Hesse. The couple would go on to have 4 more children, with Alice as the eldest. She grew up alongside her siblings, Louise, George, and Louis, each destined for a very different future. Alice received private tutoring, and from an early age, her family noticed she struggled to speak. It was her grandmother, Princess Battenberg, who noticed something unusual and sought medical experts. At last, a diagnosis arrived: congenital deafness. But this condition would not stop young Alice from learning how to communicate. Her mother, a practical woman, neither pitied her nor treated her with exaggerated tenderness. She did not try to shield her from the world. Her philosophy was simple: move forward. Thus, Alice was not treated differently than her siblings. She learned to read lips, to face difficulties on her own, to fight her own battles without overprotection. Alice overcame her challenge and became extraordinarily skilled at lip reading. She read German and English, her first languages, and later learned to do so in Greek and French. Within the world of European royalty, Alice soon began to play notable roles. For example, she served as a bridesmaid at the wedding of the future King George V to Mary of Teck. She was almost 16 when the Victorian era, the era in which she had been born, came to an end, and she attended the funeral of her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. Her life would take a decisive turn during the upheaval surrounding the coronation of Edward VII in 1902. There, Alice met Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, also known as Andreas. That encounter began a connection that would ultimately lead to marriage. They wed on October 6, 1903, with 1 civil ceremony and 2 religious ones. European royalty attended in overwhelming numbers. Nearly every guest was closely related to either the bride or the groom. The couple went on to have 5 children: Margaret in 1905, Theodora in 1906, Cecily in 1911, Sophie in 1914, and finally Philip in 1921. After their wedding, Prince Andrew pursued his military career. But as anti-monarchist movements grew in Greece, the couple traveled to Russia in 1908 to attend the wedding of Grand Duchess Maria to Prince William of Sweden. During their stay, Alice held a profound conversation with her aunt, Grand Duchess Elizabeth Theodorovna, a woman admired for her deep religious devotion. That meeting triggered a powerful spiritual transformation in Alice. It was there that she witnessed the first steps toward the creation of a religious nursing order, something that would resonate intensely within her. Yet, when she returned to Greece, she found a nation in even greater turmoil. Internal tensions rose with the ascent of the Nationalist Military League, forcing Prince Andrew to resign from the army. During the First World War, the couple faced even greater trials. The prince returned to military service, while Alice displayed remarkable courage, working as a nurse amid death and despair. The world was changing violently. The Russian, Ottoman, and German empires were all marching toward collapse. The Russian Revolution struck Alice with devastating force. Two of her aunts, her mother's sisters, were murdered by Bolshevik revolutionaries. Her aunt, Empress Alexandra, was executed alongside her husband and their 5 children, Alice's cousins. And her other aunt, Grand Duchess Elizabeth, was seized along with several members of the imperial family. The Bolsheviks took them into the Ural Mountains to an abandoned mine and threw them in. They hurled rocks, clubs, and eventually a grenade. It is known that they remained there alive, wounded, for days, until they finally died. They spent their last hours praying, singing psalms, resigned to their fate. Alice grieved these deaths with immeasurable sorrow, yet she was also deeply moved by the dignity and spiritual strength of her Aunt Elizabeth. Her kindness, her courage, her unwavering determination, even in the most brutal end. Alice fought tirelessly to save her Russian relatives, writing letters to the British Prime Minister, but all her efforts were in vain. With the end of the war, new challenges emerged. Political and social transformations struck fiercely at the power of Europe's ruling houses, and Alice's family was no exception. Her father's distinguished naval career was damaged by Britain's growing anti-German sentiment, and he was forced to renounce his title as Prince of Battenberg by order of King George V, who also anglicized the family surname to Mountbatten. Even so, Alice never changed her own name. In 1920, the family briefly returned to Greece and settled on an estate on the island of Corfu. There, in 1921, Alice gave birth to her youngest child, Prince Philip. But after the Greek army was defeated in the Greco-Turkish War, a revolutionary committee seized power, forcing King Constantine into exile once again. Prince Andrew, who had served as commander of the Second Army Corps during the conflict, was arrested and charged with treason. He faced the very real possibility of execution. Several ministers and generals had already been executed, and British diplomats feared that Prince Andrew would meet the same fate. After a questionable trial, Andrew was sentenced to permanent exile. Thus, Alice, together with her husband and children, fled Greece in haste aboard a British vessel under the protection of King George V. The family lost their entire fortune and had to settle in a modest house in Paris, generously offered by Princess Marie Bonaparte, Alice's sister-in-law. In Paris, Alice devoted herself to charity, helping Greek refugees in a small relief shop. Yet financial struggles and emotional strain began to erode the marriage. Sinking into a deep depression, vulnerable and directionless, Alice found refuge in religion. In 1928, she formally converted to the Greek Orthodox Church. But the lingering memories of her relatives' brutal murders in Russia began to torment her mind. Her religious fervor intensified, and she became convinced that she possessed healing powers, claiming that her hands were miraculous. Soon, her statements grew even more disturbing. She said she heard voices, insisted she communicated directly with Jesus Christ, and even claimed that their union was physical. It was clear that Alice was suffering from severe religious delusions. Her family was deeply distressed. Her mother, especially, understood that Alice needed urgent medical care. Her sister-in-law, Princess Marie Bonaparte, a psychoanalyst, recommended that she be evaluated by a specialist at a renowned clinic in Berlin. Alice, convinced she was perfectly healthy, refused treatment, but the doctor, with calculated subtlety, told her that it was Jesus who wished her to accept it, manipulating her faith to persuade her. At last, Alice agreed. After several sessions, the doctor diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia, which he linked, according to the theories of the time, to sexual frustration, claiming that her delusions were the product of repressed desire. The case was presented to his colleague, the famous founder of psychoanalysis, Dr. Sigmund Freud. Then came a recommendation as shocking as it was revealing in the history of psychiatry. Freud suggested exposing Princess Alice's ovaries to high doses of X-rays in order to dry the organs, hasten menopause, and make her sterile. It was believed that this would calm the patient. The results were devastating. The radiation, combined with additional shock treatments meant to accelerate the process, left permanent damage that would follow her for the rest of her life. After some time, Alice was transferred to another clinic in Switzerland. She faced a brutal battle with her mental illness, made even harder by being held against her will for more than 2 years. During that time, she missed essential moments in her daughters' lives. She could not attend any of their weddings. And Philip, her son, was only 10 years old, a child who felt deeply the absence of his mother. About this period, he would later say, with a mix of resignation and emotional detachment, "Well, it happened, and there wasn't much I could do about it, so I just carried on." Yet it was clear that the separation marked him forever. The boy lived from house to house, first sheltered by one group of relatives, then another, until he was eventually sent to live permanently with his uncle, Louis Mountbatten. Alice resisted her confinement with unwavering determination. She insisted she was completely sane and attempted to escape several times, even coming close once before being caught at a train station. When she was finally released, she no longer had a home to return to. Her husband had taken a mistress, and she became a solitary, isolated figure. She wandered through Central Europe in anonymity, keeping contact only with her mother and distancing herself from the rest of the family. Tragedy struck again in 1937. Her daughter Cecile, pregnant at the time, died alongside her husband and 2 of their children in a plane crash. It was a devastating blow to the family. Cecile and her husband were members of the Nazi Party, and the funeral was held in Germany. It was the first time in 7 years that Alice had seen her entire family together. The mourning for Cecile exposed the complexity of those family ties and the fragile place Alice held as a mother. After that painful reunion, Alice resumed contact with her relatives and returned to Athens in 1938, where she continued her charitable work, helping those in need. During the Second World War, her position became especially delicate because of her family's divided loyalties. While her son Philip served in the British Royal Navy, her sons-in-law fought on the German side. In the midst of this turmoil, Alice settled in a small apartment in central Athens, determined to help however she could. She worked actively with the Red Cross, organizing and distributing soup for the hungry. She also made trips supposedly to visit her sister Louise, but in truth she was acquiring medical supplies. Alice helped establish shelters for orphaned and abandoned children, and she volunteered as a nurse in impoverished neighborhoods. In September 1943, the German army occupied Athens. Greek Jews were in extreme danger. Nearly 60,000 were deported to concentration camps, and only about 2,000 survived. During this desperate period, Alice hid a Jewish widow and her 2 children in her home, protecting them from the Gestapo and preventing their deportation. Thanks to her, they escaped a certain death in the Nazi camps. The liberation of Athens in October 1944 left behind a shattered city. Chaos continued to spread through the streets as communist guerrillas clashed with British forces for control of the region. During this turmoil, Alice suffered extreme food shortages, surviving almost entirely on bread and butter. It was then that she received the news of her husband Andrew's death in December 1944. The news carried a heavy sorrow, for there had been hope of a reunion after the war. Even so, Alice continued to take risks, distributing food in the streets and defying the nightly curfew. When someone warned her about the danger of stray bullets, she replied with unwavering calm, a hint of irony, and a bravery that bordered on defiance. "They say you never hear the shot that kills you, and besides, I'm deaf. Why should I worry?" In 1947, her only son, now Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, announced his intention to marry Princess Elizabeth, the eldest daughter and heir of King George VI. Alice had no money. She could not offer her future daughter-in-law an expensive gift. So she made a decision that was as humble as it was symbolic. She handed her son one of her tiaras, one of the few jewels she still possessed, and told him, "Take its finest stone. I want it to become a ring for my future daughter-in-law." That diamond tiara had been a wedding gift from the Russian czars when Alice married Prince Andrew in 1903. Philip had the jewel transformed into an engagement ring, as well as a bracelet for his bride, Elizabeth. Alice returned to England in April of that same year to attend her son's wedding. Philip's sisters were not invited to the ceremony due to the strong anti-German sentiment that still dominated the United Kingdom after the Second World War. In 1949, Alice founded an order of Greek Orthodox nursing nuns whose mission was to help and protect vulnerable elderly people and orphans in the poorest neighborhoods of Athens. However, the order soon suffered from a lack of donations and vocations, and it eventually dissolved. Even so, Alice maintained her religious habits and remained deeply involved in charitable work. In 1960, she traveled to India after receiving an invitation from Minister Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, though her trip was cut short when Alice began to feel ill. Later, she claimed to have had an out-of-body experience. Her health continued to decline, along with her hearing. In 1967, after the military junta overthrew the Greek monarchy once and for all, the country plunged into instability. Alice was 82 years old and very fragile. It was then that her son and daughter-in-law, Queen Elizabeth II, convinced her to leave Greece permanently and move to London, where she would live in Buckingham Palace for the remainder of her life. After decades devoted to others, Alice finally found security and stability in Britain. Yet her bravery during the war would not receive full recognition until long after her death. Alice had a habit of smoking a cheap, harsh cigarette brand called Woodbines, a brand commonly found among working-class men. Because of it, members of the court could recognize her presence by the smell and puff of smoke long before they caught sight of her. Her unusual walk, paired with her religious clothing, made her seem eccentric in the eyes of many. Some simply dismissed her as a madwoman, refusing to take her seriously. Princess Alice stood in stark contrast to the Queen Mother, her son's mother-in-law, a refined, elegant woman, fiercely dedicated to royal duty. Alice, on the other hand, was the opposite, eccentric, unpredictable, willing to smoke openly even while wearing her religious habit. Yet, despite appearances, children adored her. Prince Charles and Princess Anne loved spending time with her, captivated by the stories she told about Queen Victoria. After 2 years living close to her family, Alice's health declined, and on December 5, 1969, at the age of 84, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her death drew little attention. Princess Alice held only a modest place in the nation's affection, largely unknown, and her charitable efforts even less so. Her funeral was simple, befitting a life guided by service rather than status. Her son, Prince Philip, spoke with emotion, saying it was extraordinary that his mother had been born in Windsor Castle, and that after a life shaped by wars, tragedies, and long separations, she had returned to that very same castle to die, completing a perfect circle. Her remains were placed in the royal crypt of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. Before her death, however, she expressed her wish to be buried at the convent of St. Magdalene on the Mount of Olives, near her aunt, Grand Duchess Elizabeth Feodorovna. It was not an easy wish to fulfill, and only on August 3, 1988, were her remains transferred to their final resting place. On October 31, 1994, her surviving children, Prince Philip and Princess Sophia of Hanover, traveled to Jerusalem for a ceremony honoring their mother for hiding the Cohen family in her home in Athens during the Second World War. Alice was also acknowledged as a Holocaust heroine by the British government in 2010. Undoubtedly, she was a different kind of princess, one who endured wars and personal turmoil. Perhaps the greatest battle she ever fought was against herself, her own struggles, her own inner storms. And in the midst of so much conflict, she chose the one thing she could control, continuously devoting her time to the care of those who needed it most.